Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Everybody. Today, I wanted to record a podcast for you to talk about basking. Basking is a way of relating to other people that's a little more body-based, certainly less head-based than what most of us are doing most of the time. It allows us to take in different, often very useful information and lets us engage with other people a little differently. That's often a very positive thing, both for us and for them. So today I want to talk about what basking is and how I learned about it originally. And then I am going to share I'm going to share 5 different applications of basking. So 5 different contexts in which you can use it, and I'll share why it can be very useful in each of those contexts. So let's go. So first, as I said, I want to start with what basking is and how I originally learned about it. So I originally learned about basking back when I did my coach training with New Ventures West, which was a bunch of years ago now. 8 or 9 years ago. One of my coaching mentors at the time said to me, when you're having a consult or an intake or any of your first conversations with a client, it's so tempting in those first conversations to focus on every little word that they're saying. You want to capture every single word. You're writing it all down. But my coaching mentor pointed out, yes, obviously that's extremely important. The words they are saying are important, but if you are only listening to their words, you are also missing other important information. And so their recommendation was that especially in those initial conversations, you focus on basking. And they described basking as similar to basking in the sun, just like soaking up the other person like they're the sun and you're soaking up their rays. And if you could see my hands right now, even as I'm recording this podcast, you'd see that they're up, almost like kind of like in cactus pose, if you know that yoga pose, or like I'm kind of like a football goal, that the football goes over. My arms are kind of up so I can just have even more of surface area of my body, just like soaking up the other person. And even as I am describing this, I'm sure you could imagine the difference if you were my client describing your problem, sitting with someone who's just very cognitively capturing every detail of what you're saying. They're understanding every word versus someone who, they're hearing the words that you're saying, but they're also basking in you. They're capturing the felt experience of being with you. And so for me as a coach, that was just extraordinarily helpful because so much of what is important is not said in words. Because maybe you're telling me in words, my job, it's really good in so many ways. But when I'm basking in you, that's not the message that I'm getting. I'm getting something different. Or maybe you're telling me, I really want to make this particular choice. And my basking is telling me that there's something else at play. And so when my felt experience is at odds with the literal words you're telling me, that's going to be a very productive coaching conversation without a doubt. And to be clear, I was describing that I'm holding on my arms, I'm soaking them up by the sun. I don't do any of this in an obvious way. All of that is more metaphorical. In real life, when I'm basking, I'm just sitting like a normal person. I don't sit there like non-responsively, just soaking them up. I'm not actually holding up my hands. My hands are just in a normal position. But basking is something that I'm just doing as an internal experience for me as I'm listening to them talk. They may feel like I'm, hopefully they feel like I'm particularly present with them. But beyond that, they will almost, uniformly have no idea that I'm doing this particular technique. Basking, I will also say it doesn't have to be long. So in its simplest form, it can just be the space of a breath, or really half a breath, just an inhale or just an exhale. Or in the longer end, it might be a couple of breaths if the person that I'm basking in is speaking for a more extended period of time. And again, I just don't want you to think that this is like a weird thing to do. I am still listening to the words that they are saying, to the content of what they're saying. And it does take some practice to get good at this. To be able to both hear what they are saying and then also, shift your focus to primarily even be focusing on the felt experience of being with them. focusing on what's emanating from them, what's landing into me. But you can do it. You can still receive their words while be focusing primarily on the basking. So that at its core is this concept of basking. It's soaking up this other person like you are soaking up the rays of the sun. It's not a cognitive practice. It's fundamentally felt and experienced. It's really listening with your body instead of your ears. And it has turned out that this technique of basking, I've used it in a bunch of contexts in my life that have nothing at all to do with coaching. And I've seen clients use it in many contexts that have nothing to do with coaching as well. So that was really my impetus in making this episode, to share this way of relating. So this is my attempt to describe what basking is. And now I want to share 5 different contexts in which that I have found that basking can be really helpful. So the first one is in any professional and human relating context. Any professional context in which you need to relate to humans. So I've just mentioned that I use basking all the time as a coach, but it's really not confined to professions which are, a little bit more inherently touchy-feely, like therapy or coaching. I actually think that basking can be used really masterfully as a strategic advantage in professional contexts that are typically quite cognitive. So in that kind of context, having non-cognitive information, perhaps a felt experience of another person, that actually gives you a really competitive edge in which to help understand how to engage with them. So just as an example, if you're having a meeting with your boss about the upcoming fiscal year projections, you could take a moment to bask in your boss. And again, to be clear, you're not going to tell them you're basking in them. You aren't going to sit in silence and breathe with them. You're not going to hold up your hands like a strange person. There's just going to be a moment when, maybe they're talking to you about the Q3 numbers for a couple of sentences, and you're just going to take a breath and you're going to soak them in like the sun. And in that moment, you will have an opportunity to get a sense of what is going on for them, the felt experience of them as they are. I obviously can't say for sure what you'll find in that moment, but I predict that you will relate to them differently, knowing more about them. It might come out in subtle ways, like how you share an idea or what approach you take or what kind of jokes you make, or it might just help you feel a little calmer and more engaged and more present, and frankly, often more positive, all of which will be to your strategic professional advantage. This basking technique is something you could do with your direct report in a weekly one-on-one. If you're a physician and a patient is telling you about their medical problems, you could take a moment to bask in them. If you're an accountant having a consult with a potential client, you could bask in them. Again, just get this real felt sense of how they're arriving. And to reiterate, it's not that your brain turns off while basking. As you practice, you'll realize that you are able to take in that more cognitive information. It's just that you're shifting your focus to also be receiving more felt information too. So that's the first context in which I think basking can be really helpful. Any professional context in which you are relating to another person, it just gives you some more information about them on a different level and helps you relate to them from that perspective. The second context in which basking can be very helpful is any context in which you want to listen more or better, or when you want the other person to open up more. So I'll use a client example here. I have a client right now who has adult children who she's very close to and she talks to a lot and who are very important to her. She is also a very skilled professional in her field. And when you are a very skilled and accomplished professional in your field, you typically like to solve problems. And that's what she was often doing and with her kids. She was often offering them advice about how to solve their problems. But she'd also gotten the feedback from her kids fairly regularly, hey, Mom, I actually don't need that advice. Please stop giving me advice. And sometimes her kids would be, maybe a little bit annoyed. And sometimes she felt like they'd maybe end the conversation sooner than she'd prefer, perhaps because she was talking a little bit more, or she was giving a little bit more advice than they would prefer. But she couldn't quite seem to stop herself. And she told me that she had this feeling when she was with them, we only have a small amount of time to connect. So I want to make sure they really get their problems solved. And you could understand, that makes sense, right? She wants to solve their problems. So she's going to help them solve their problems. She's going to give them really good ideas. And I offered her this concept of basking. This idea that what if all her kids really wanted from her, whether they were on the phone or in person, what if all they really wanted was just to have their mom bask in them? And we literally practiced this together. I did that thing where I like hold up my hands and I demonstrate, how to bask in the sun. And we talked about how, for her, basking might also mean maybe leaning back in her chair a little bit, whereas before she might have leaned forward a little bit. And she really took it on. She started trying it. She started doing it, having that experience of basking when she was on phone calls with her kids. And she found that they were lingering on the phone more. Sometimes she even had to end the conversation first with them. She'd be like, "Oh, honey, I gotta go," because they were just so happy to tell her everything, which of course she loved. And then she also went to go visit a couple of them, and she came back and she was like, "Katie, you won't believe what happened." She had a bunch of these, again, really lingering conversations, including with some of her son-in-laws, who actually she really wanted to kind of invite to open up with her. People were lingering in the kitchen to talk with her when she felt like sometimes in the past they might have kind of left more quickly. And this is my favorite example from this. One of her son-in-laws, while driving her to the airport, completely unprompted, nothing, she didn't say anything, but said to her that she had seemed really much more present in the moment on this trip. And first of all, she loved that feedback. And also she told me later that she agreed. She did feel a lot more present in the moment. And maybe best of all, she felt more relaxed, which is one of my favorite things about basking. You get to just take the other person in. You get to soak them up, and they love it. So that's the second way in which you can use basking in any personal context when you just want to listen more or listen better or just invite the other person to open up more. The third context in which you can use basking is in any conversation where you seem to be going in circles or really going nowhere at all. Like, so let's say that your partner seems really fixated on something and you don't really get why. Like, maybe you take this moment to kind of bask in them, to really soak in their whole body, like the rays of the sun, and everything emanating from them you realize is really tight. And you could say something if you wanted about that, like, "Oh my gosh, it seems like this is really bothering you on a deeper level than I realized. Can you tell me more about that?" And I will also offer that the thing about basking is that you don't even have to explicitly comment on what you find. You could just let it change you. So perhaps, again, if you had basked in your partner in that moment, you might show up differently with this kind of like deeper knowing about them. You might be more open or more empathetic or ask different questions. So that's the third context in which basking can be really useful. In any conversation when you seem to be kind of like going in circles and not getting anywhere, rather than getting annoyed or kind of checking out a bit, you might try basking. And then the fourth context in which I have found basking to be very useful is just any context in which you're a little socially anxious or a little awkward. So I will often use basking at a party where maybe I don't know that many people. I like it because it helps me get out of my head, which, let's be honest, might be focusing on like, "Oh, I'm being a little awkward," or whatever. It kind of gives me something to do instead of just being in my head. And that thing that I do is then likely to lead to more connection or deeper connection. Because again, even if the other person has no idea that you're doing this particular technique, which they shouldn't, there can be a subtle shift in the nature of the interaction when you are basking in that. And it has this added bonus, which my client kind of already pointed to, of just making everything easier. Like, you feel more relaxed. So I love it from that perspective as well. And of course, when you're more relaxed, you're going to connect with other people better. So that's the fourth context in which you might use basking, any social context where you're feeling a little nervous. And then the fifth context in which you might use basking is in any moment when life is feeling flat or boring or dull. Oh, I love it. I can feel my body, how useful it is in that context. You might set an intention, if you're feeling a little disengaged, if you're feeling a little bored, you might set an intention to bask in a couple of people. Maybe you're going to go run some errands and you set an intention and you bask in the cashier at the grocery store, and you bask in the other parents while you're waiting to pick up your kid, and you bask in your dental hygienist. I find that the world is always more interesting when you are basking in it. I find that for me, it helps me feel subtly more energized, more positive, and also more relaxed. So I love that as kind of this gentle way to re-engage with the world a little bit when you're feeling kind of dull, this sense of malaise, this sense of being checked out a bit. You can do it anywhere with any person, and they never have to know. So to review, because I feel like whenever I listen to a podcast, there's all these good ideas and I can't remember what they were. So to review for your brain, 5 places where you could use basking are Number one, in any professional context, even ones that are seemingly only cognitive, it helps you connect better with what the person in front of you truly needs, which is a really masterful strategic move if that's something you're wanting. Number two, in any personal context where you want to listen better, talk less, or invite the other person to open up more. Three, in any conversation that seems to be stuck or going in circles to help you understand what's going on beneath all the words. Four, whenever you feel a little socially nervous, like at a party. And five, whenever life is feeling a little flat or boring or dull or you feel a little down. It helps you kind of like re-engage and re-energize. So that's basking. Like I said, it can be a little wonky at first. You might worry that you're going to miss important words or important cognitive information, or like it's going to be super obvious to the other person that you're basking. But eventually you really do figure it out, and you figure out how to do it for just a breath or 2 breaths or 3 in a way that's not awkward and doesn't require you to miss out on the content of what they're saying, if that's important. So I hope you'll give it a try. Let me know how it goes. And I will also say, this podcast is just about to end, but I just want to make a quick request. Have you given this podcast a rating and a 2-sentence review yet? It would really mean a lot to me. It's also the kind of thing that you could truly do in 60 seconds or less. And I know that probably every podcast that you ever listen to makes this request at some point, and like most of us ignore it most of the time. But here's the thing. I'm really not some like behemoth podcaster with thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of listeners. There's really just like a couple of hundred of you listen to this episode. So each and every one of those reviews really makes a huge difference. So I would just be so grateful if once this finishes, you took that 60 seconds of your time to click a star rating and write a quick 2-sentence review. Because again, your review, you, the person listening to this podcast, your review matters. And above all, I just want to say that I am rooting for you. Until next time. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katieseaver.com. I'd love to meet you.